Most people believe that the best rep range for calisthenics is 1 to 5 reps, but is that really true? In this video, we will be explaining all of this and what will be the best rep range for your training. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're talking about rep ranges, what are they and why do they matter, all the different types of rep ranges and what they are good for, how do they apply to calisthenics, and how to implement them correctly to your training. A rep range is how many times you do a movement repetitively in one set without stopping or taking a break. For example, let's say I was doing conservative pull-ups and on my first set I did 20 reps. And then on my next set I did 18 and the set after that I did 16. That means that the rep range I'm using is between 15 to 20. Okay, but why does it matter how many reps I'm doing in my sets? Okay, let's break it down. Every rep range could give you a different stimulant and a different advantage depending on the exercise that you're doing. And because we want to maximize our progress, we should optimize our training by using the correct rep ranges for every exercise in our workout. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the main 5 rep ranges. The first one, which I don't recommend to use on a regular basis, is the 1 to 2 rep range. And I say that because this rep range generates a lot of fatigue, because you will have to use a very hard progression, which is not safe to do on a weekly basis. And that's why there is only 2 real benefits of using this rep range, which is testing your strength every couple of months or so, or when you really want to peak your strength. And in that case, you will use this rep range for 2, maximum 3 weeks. The second rep range, which is known as the strength builder, is the 3 to 5 rep range. And people usually say that because it's the sweet spot between not being too dangerous and being very specific to our goal. Because if we want to be able to lift heavy weights or perform hard skills, we want to train very close and specific to that without getting injured. And this rep range is very good for that because it lets us use very high intensity and still be able to do progressive overload pretty easily, because it's very difficult to go from sets of 1 rep to sets of 2 reps, but it's not as difficult to go from sets of 3 reps to sets of 4 reps to even 5 reps, because the percentage of gain you will need to do week by week is not that high. The only real con for this rep range is that it's not the most efficient for hypertrophy gains. Not saying that you cannot build muscle with this rep range, you can, but I'm saying it wouldn't be as efficient. And I say that because this rep range lacks time under tension, so the actual time of descent isn't that long. And if we want hypertrophy, we need that time under tension. The next rep range I'll be talking about is the 10 to 15 rep range, which is considered the hypertrophy rep range. And the main reason for that is because this rep range gives you the perfect amount of time under tension without sacrificing any progressive overload potential, which means you can progress with this rep range pretty easily, which will make sure you get those hypertrophy gains. But remember, because we are doing more than 10 reps, we'll have to use more than 2 light loads or easier progressions, which could be less specific to our goals. So if you want the best of both worlds, the next rep range, which is the 6 to 8 rep range, probably be the best option, because this rep range gives you the ability to use heavy loads and harder progressions and still gives you a pretty good time under tension. But remember, because this rep range is the middle ground between the two, so it will be hard to get maximum results in both areas, gaining strength and hypertrophy, solely because that this rep range is not specific to any of those goals. But the good thing that it could do both at the same time if you do it correctly. Okay, the last rep range I'm going to talk about is the 16 to 30 rep range, which is usually used for any sort of pump work or as a workout finisher for the end of the workout. The only real downside of this rep range, if you want to use it, is that it's very mentally fatiguing, because it's very hard for most people to go to failure and push hard in this high of a rep range. And that's why they are usually being used for any isolation movement or even any conditioning exercise. And the main reason behind that is that those movements are not that hard mentally to perform compared to any compound movement or something similar. But if you can still push hard, they could be a good option for you. And yes, before you ask, there is more rep ranges like the 30+ plus rep range, but for 99% of you it's pretty useless because it's mainly used for endurance training, which we don't really prioritize. Okay, now that we understand all the types of rep ranges, let's apply them to calisthenics training. In calisthenics, our main objective is to get as strong as possible and sometimes gain a bit of muscle mass. And of course, for the best strength gains, we would need to be as specific as possible to our goal. So at least 70% of our training should be in the 3 to 5 rep range. And that number could go even to 90% sometimes. But that depends on how much muscle mass you need to gain or you want to gain, and in what rep range are you using for the rest of your work. For example, if we are using the 10 to 15 rep range, you could keep your strength work closer to 90%. But if we are using a bit heavier of a rep range, like the 6 to 8 reps, it's better to keep the strength work between 70 to 80%. Okay, now that we understand what we need to do in our main strength work, we have to consider one important thing, and that is that calisthenics is also about learning new skills and exercises. And that's why it's important after a month or two of consistent training to use the 1 to 2 rep range to try new stuff or harder exercises to see if you actually improved. Okay, now let me give you some important tips you should know about. The first one is when you are picking an exercise, think about what rep range it actually suits. Not every movement works well with every rep range, and forcing it could hold back your progress. Take the front lever negatives as example. They are super demanding, so trying to hit 5 reps in one set isn't just unrealistic, it's also brutal on your body and hard to recover from. That's why only going for 3 reps makes more sense, because you are staying in the strength zone without destroying your nervous system. Now on the flip side, let's say for example, you wanted to really feel your lats working in wide grip pull-ups. If you're doing 3 to 5 reps, you're probably too focused on getting the rep up and handling the heavy load, instead of actually feeling your lats working. But if you will move it to the 10 to 12 rep range, you'll be able to slow down the tempo and control the movement better, and that will help you to focus on driving your elbows down and actually feeling the lats engage. Okay, so the idea is simple. Let the rep range match the exercise goal and intensity, not the other way around. The second tip is to not be afraid to use higher rep ranges while sticking to the same progressions. Just because you're mainly using the 3 to 5 rep range doesn't mean you have to move to a harder progression the second you hit 5 reps. Calisthenics is not like lifting weights, where you just can throw another 2.5 kilos and keep going. Here, the next progression might be a huge jump in difficulty, and you might be not ready for it just yet. So let me give you a simple example of that. Let's say you went from 3 sets of 3 reps to 3 sets of 5 reps. If the next progression is still too hard to do for at least 3 reps on the first set, that is totally fine. Just keep going and push 2 sets of 6 reps or even 8 reps. Even though I think 8 is an overkill, you're still building strength, improving control, and refining your form, which what matters in the long run. The key is to don't rush to the next progression just because you hit a certain rep goal. Think of it like this. In calisthenics, staying longer in a progression and exploring different rep ranges could actually help you to build a stronger foundation before moving on to next progression. Okay, the last tip is to use an easier progression with a higher rep range to refine your technique. For example, let's say you wanted to build strength for the half-lay front lever, and you're probably doing half-lay front lever hold for around 10 seconds or so, really pushing to max effort to try to hold longer. But there is a trick. You could take an easier progression of the movement you're trying to do, and in our example, something like an advanced stack front lever, and hold that version for 15, even 20 seconds, for the only reason that it's less demanding, and you'll be able to focus on activating the right muscle without any shaking and your form breaking down. Those longer and controlled holds helps your body understand the position better and build strength in the correct patterns that you're trying to master. And if you want me to make a separate video on what is the best hold times for calisthenics, let me know down in the comments. Okay, so in short, use an easier variation with a longer hold time or higher reps to build better technique and and muscle activation that will directly support your harder skills. Okay, now let's talk about what I do in my own training to put you in perspective. So around 85% of what I do is in the 3 to 5 rep range, because my main goal right now is to build maximal strength, and I stick to that rep range for most of my key exercises. Things like front lever row, planche presses, and any exercise that is specific to my skills. That rep range lets me be specific, work hard, and really focus on strength. Then what I'll do at the end of my workouts, I will usually throw one exercise to work on hypertrophy, like pull-ups or dips, that I will perform in the 6 to 8 rep range, and depending on the movement, sometimes even 10 to 15 reps, especially if the movement is more basic and I want to add a bit more volume in. This way I'm covering both goals, building strength and keeping some hypertrophy work in the mix to support it. Alright, so how do you actually apply this to your own training? It's simple. First, look at your main goal. If you're like me and your focus is maximal strength, most of the exercises should be in the 3 to 5 rep range, but it doesn't mean you have to avoid other rep ranges completely. If you're still not ready to move on to the next progression, like I mentioned earlier, it's completely fine to stay in the same progression and try to go for more reps, like 6 or even more. Just make sure your form stays good and you're still challenging yourself. You can still throw 1 to 2 exercises in the higher rep ranges, like 6 to 8 reps or even 10 to 15 for more volume or hypertrophy, especially with an easier movement like pull-ups or dips. And most important, when you actually pick a rep range for an exercise, make sure that rep range actually suits the exercise. Don't force heavy exercises like planche negatives into a 10 rep set that is not effective and will just burn you out. So choose an exercise that fits your goals. Match that exercise to the right rep range. Stick to that rep range for long enough to actually see results before jumping to the next thing, and don't be afraid to use new rep ranges. Okay, that's it. Hope you find value in this video, and if you want me to talk about any other topic, let me know. And until then, I will see you all next time.